Well, meanwhile, aid has started arriving in Gaza via a U.S. military-built temporary floating pier. Now, trucks with the aid rolled across the pier for the first time into the besieged enclave as Israeli restrictions continued to disrupt deliveries of vital food and other supplies at Gaza border crossings. The U.S. and aid groups hope to increase deliveries at the pier to as many as 150 trucks per day. Well, despite the efforts, the UN's food program says the threat of famine has never loomed larger for Gaza's 2.2 million people.
Explosions and gunshots ring out in the deserted streets of Rafah. The southern city is the latest focus of operations of the Israeli military. Israel says Hamas's last remaining fighters are based in Rafah, along with the group's leaders responsible for the October 7 terror attack. So it needs to send more troops there.
Our troops have destroyed several tunnels and will destroy even more soon. This activity will intensify. Hamas is not an organization that can reorganize. It does not have the reserve troops. It does not have the ability to produce munitions. It has no supplies. The result is we are cutting it off. We are wearing it down.
Israeli tanks have already advanced deep into Rafah's eastern outskirts, pushing into residential areas. The UN says almost 600,000 people taking refuge in Rafah have now left. After Israel took control of the Gaza side of the Rafah border crossing, supplies and medical services have been dwindling.
So food which are in place already in southern Gaza are running out. I think we're talking about almost none left. Food in the market, very soon there'll be none left. Medical supplies in the hospitals that remain in the south, a couple of 2 or 3 weeks, I think, to go, perhaps a month.
Aid agencies say a temporary pier anchored by U.S. troops and regular airdrops are no substitute for ground deliveries. Palestinians, too, have been calling for the border crossing to reopen.
We don't want ships. We want the border crossings to open. We want safety. We want official borders. Those planes as well with the parachutes. They throw food at us like dogs, like beggars. That doesn't work. It falls on people. It brings us problems.
With most aid operations disrupted due to the Rafah offensive and the humanitarian situation already dire, agencies warn Gazans are now facing an immediate risk of famine.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by Tess Ingram. She is the spokesperson for UNICEF in New York, and she just spent 2 weeks in Gaza last month. Tess, it's good to have you with us. I want to pick up on your experience that you had in Gaza so recently, considering that the UN is saying that the threat of famine remains real and acute for the people in Gaza. Is that also what you saw?
It is, unfortunately. I think, our worst fears are being realised at the moment. We've been warning for months about the risk of famine in Gaza, and particularly in the north of Gaza. And when I went to the north, I walked around a hospital where I saw many malnourished children and spoke to their parents. It's just heartbreaking to see a child in that condition, in so much pain, and not being able to receive the help that they need to recover. Our fear now is that because of the issues with aid getting in through those southern border crossings, because of the Rafah offensive, the already dire situation in the south could escalate to what we saw in the north of Gaza in a very short space of time.
We do have aid that is now coming into the territory via this floating pier that we just reported on. Your agency says more than 300,000 children in Gaza are at risk of malnutrition and starvation. How then do you decide which children get the food, considering that the food is in short supply?
Yeah, look, it's really difficult at the moment when the needs are so enormous and the aid is really a drop in the ocean compared to those needs. As a humanitarian aid worker, it's just heartbreaking to know that you cannot serve everybody. But UNICEF is there, we're staying, and we're doing our best to deliver despite these really difficult circumstances and reach the children and families that need us the most. We try and plan our distributions based on need, but also we're restricted by access. As we've been saying now for months, it's really hard for us to get the safety assurances that we need to move to some of these areas. So it's a day-by-day play at the moment.
More than half a million people have fled Rafah in search of a safer place. Aid agencies say that there are no more safe places left for people to go to. Give us a sense of the challenges that aid agencies are going through to provide help to these people.
So there are two main areas where people are being asked to move to from Rafah, and the estimated number of displaced people that have fled Rafah in the last 10 days is now at about 640,000 people. So that's about half the number of displaced people that were in Rafah. An enormous movement of people in such a short amount of time. And what we're trying to do to service them in these two areas they're going, Al-Mawasi and Deir al-Balah, is to assess their needs and try and bring some level of basic service to those areas. Because in Al-Mawasi, for example, it's essentially a sand dune. There's nothing there. There are no toilets. There are no showers. There's very little infrastructure for people to build shelters against. I walked through that area and it was already busy a month ago. So I can only imagine now, and I'm hearing from colleagues just how crowded it is. But it's very difficult for us to meet these soaring needs when we can't get aid in. So the aid supply has almost ground virtually to a halt in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and it seems the world's attention is focused on the southern part of Gaza, but it's not all peaceful in the north. In fact, fighting continues in the northern part of the territory. What's the humanitarian situation there?
So the north of the Gaza Strip is the area that has been the most affected by the fighting and has had the least access to aid consistently over the last 7 months. It's been very difficult for aid agencies to get the safety assurances we need to travel north. We have one colleague at UNICEF in the north of Gaza who remains there, and I've spoken to her and she's told me just how difficult the situation is there at the moment. People are being told to evacuate, but these are people who've been there now for 7 months and have survived serious lack of services, including a lack of food. And so people are unsure about what to do now, whether they really do take that plunge and try and move. But the fighting is, as you say, intensifying in the north as well as the south, and we're also seeing strikes in the middle area. So right across the Gaza Strip, children's lives remain at risk.
Tess Ingram with UNICEF. Tess, we appreciate your time and your input tonight. Thank you.
And I'm joined once more by Shaina Lowe. She's communications advisor for the Norwegian Refugee Council in Jerusalem. Shaina, good to see you again. Aid has now started arriving in Gaza via the U.S.-built pier. Can this new maritime route bring enough aid into the Gaza Strip?
No, this route is estimated to bring only between 90 and maximum 150 truckloads per day. At this point, we need to see a flood of humanitarian assistance enter Gaza, and the only efficient and cost-effective way to do that is through the crossings that already exist. There are literally thousands of trucks lined up on the Egyptian side of the border waiting to enter Gaza, and we need those crossings to be operational in order for that aid to get in and help people as quickly as they need it.
Those crossings, you mentioned it there, they're not operational right now. Let's talk about the distribution of what is coming in through the air and via this new pier. Can the goods coming in realistically reach all the people in need?
No, the airdrops by and large, I believe, have been focused on northern Gaza. It's mostly food and maybe some medicines that have been dropped down. We heard yesterday from about staff of ours in northern Gaza who are talking about that in addition to the food that they're getting, which at this point, the convoys coming in through the newly opened Northern Erez West crossing is just wheat. But people are in need of shelter supplies, they're in need of hygiene kits, they're in need of other items that aren't entering through these crossings. The airdrops are not a cost-effective way. There are lots of ways in which they can cause harm, either by falling on aid recipients or falling into the sea, as we've seen. And as the person in your report said, it's not a dignified way for people to receive aid. Aid should be distributed by humanitarians in an orderly way to ensure that the most vulnerable people are having access to the items that they need.
All eyes are currently on Rafah, home to hundreds of thousands of displaced people. Now, with a large-scale military operation, they're looming. What's their situation? What are their living conditions?
I spoke yesterday to a colleague of ours who is in Rafah. She described a city that has been largely deserted. The UN has said that 640,000 people, as of this morning, had fled Rafah. Most are moving as far to the west as they can. They are entering barren strips of land, areas where they do not have capacity or the facilities and services needed in order to meet their basic needs. Aid agencies are overwhelmed trying to respond to the needs, but the needs keep on growing. Desperation is high. We've heard that at our own aid distributions. We've had aid recipients faint because they are so malnourished. We've seen people begging for any scrap of assistance they can receive. The situation continues to deteriorate day by day.
Now, with the situation so volatile, how does your organization adapt its operations on the ground?
Well, we've been working to get the small amount of aid that we received right before the border crossings distributed to people who are in need, but we are quickly running out of supplies. And once those supplies run out, unless these crossings reopen, we will not be able to provide much or any response at all to the people who are in need.
Shaina Lowe from the Norwegian Refugee Council in Jerusalem. Always great to get your insights. Thank you so much.